exception and unchecked exception. So checked exception means compiler aware of the exception, we call it as checked exception. If the compiler knows that exception, you can tell that exception as checked exception. Then unchecked exception, compiler unaware of the exception, we call it as unchecked exception. So here we have seen one example. So here we have seen one example, arithmetic exception. Whether compiler knows this exception, whether compiler knows this arithmetic exception. So how to get to know whether compiler knows or not? Simple thing you have to follow here. So int c equals 5 by 0, I'll write. Whether is compiler showing any error now? Compiler is not showing any error or any exception, means arithmetic exception comes under the unchecked exception. And I will write one more exception. So there is one class called thread class. Inside that class we have one method, that is sleep method. It is a static method. Whenever I try to use this method, it will throw the exception. You can observe there unhandled exception type interrupted exception. So here compiler is not showing any error. Compiler is not showing any error in the 9th line. There we know that we'll get 100%. We are confident we will get arithmetic exception. But compiler is not showing any error. But in the 10th line, it is showing that this line will throw or will give an interrupted exception. So by this, can you understand the points about the checked exception and unchecked exception? Here, compiler does not know the exception. But here, compiler knows the exception. Compiler knows the exception. That's why compiler is not leaving to execute the program, because anyways exception will occur. That's why he will tell to handle the exception. That's why compiler will tell for all the checked exception we have to handle. So how to handle the exception we know by using a try catch block method, and which is the exception causing statement here, thread dot sleep of 100. So I will write this exception inside the try catch block. So now you observe here. Now whether compiler is showing any error, any exception there? No, because we have handled the exception. So here it is throwing interrupted exception from the try block. In the catch block we have mentioned exception. So all the exceptions are of exception type only, because exception is the parent class of all the child class exceptions. So here we have handled the exception. Is it clear for everyone about checked exception and unchecked exception? Difference between them, identifying them. So during the compile time, if you are getting any error about the exception, it is a checked exception. And if the compiler is not aware of that exception and compiler will not force you to handle that exception, those exceptions are unchecked exception. Here compiler was forcing before to handle that, or else he will not leave for execution. That's why we have used try catch block. See, here you can observe compiler is forcing now to handle the exception, unhandled exception type, interrupted exception. Yeah. So unhandled exception type, interrupted exception. So I hope there is no doubt in the checked exception and unchecked exception and how to handle the exception and what is the definition of an exception. Now we will learn there are two important keywords in the exceptions. Those are throws keyword. Throws keyword. So it is one keyword in the Java. It is used to declare a checked exception. It is used to declare a checked exception. So here in the before program, what we have done? We have handled the exception. We have handled the exception. Did we declare anything here? No. But with the help of throws keyword, we can declare the checked exception. So where to use, how to use, we will learn now. So throws keyword, they, they should be used in the method declaration statement, or else method header. They should be used in the method declaration statement or method header. What is the syntax for using the throws keyword? Where to use, we got to know. We have to use in the method declaration statement, and the syntax is sorry. So we know that axis modifier is important. Then modifier for the method. Then return type, method name, then some formal arguments will write. So along with that, with the help of throws keyword, we can declare the exception. So it is the syntax for using throws keyword. So in the method declaration or method header, with the help of throws keyword, we can declare a checked exception. So compiler will give two options for the checked exception for the programmer. So programmer should handle the check exception or he must declare the checked exception, or else compiler will not leave the programmer to execute the program. So for the checked exception, we are having two types. One, using the try catch block, we can handle the exception, and using the throws keyword, we can declare a checked exception. We'll see the example now. Yeah, same thing. I will remove the try catch block. Now, in the method, where is the method declaration or method header? Here. So here, throws interrupted exception. Throws interrupted exception. So now there is no compile time error. Compiler is not showing any error here. So by this we can understand that for the checked exception we can handle or we can declare the checked exception with the help of throws keyword in the method declaration statement. Is it clear for everyone about the throws keyword? Where to use, when to use, and how to use? Okay. Then there is one more keyword, that is throw keyword. After the throws, throw keyword. So throw keyword, mainly it is used to create user defined exception. Mainly, mainly it is used to create user defined exception in the Java. So for example, see, we have come across many exceptions till now. Class cast exception, null pointer exception, arithmetic exception, string index out of bounds exception, array index out of bounds exception, SQL exceptions and all. So there, so these exceptions are whether programmer created, whether we created these exceptions. So these are all the inbuilt classes. What we are doing, we are using them. We are using the predefined exceptions. So there will be question mark in the Java, whether a programmer can create his own exception. Till now we have used only the predefined or inbuilt exceptions class. But with the help of throw keyword, a programmer can create his own exception. So it is used to create a user defined exception. So we'll see one example here. And before that, for creating a programmer defined exception, we have to follow some rules. So the rules are, yeah. So step one, create a class and inherit exception. And inherit exception class. Then after that, create parameterized constructor. Parameterized constructor of string type. Then inside constructor call super call statement and pass string value or string variable. So these are the three steps we have to follow whenever we want to create our own exception. Instead of using the predefined exceptions, by using a throw keyword, we can create our own exception. So we'll see one example now, how to create the user defined exception. But remember these points. Create, first we have to create the class. I'll write one example here. First we have to create any class. So I'll take demo. And for this class, we have to inherit exception class. So extends exception, then create constructor, that is parameterized constructor of string type. So string s. Then afterwards, call super call statement and pass the string data. So yes. So by this, we can create our own exception. So we'll write the program in the Eclipse. Yeah, I'll take one more class. So here I will demo, already it's created. Demo one is there. I'll take it as random. Yeah. So there is no class called random. I'm going to create that. So here first what we have to do, create a class and extend exception, then create constructor. So random parameterized constructor of string type. So then super call statement of yes. That's all. It is completed. Now go to the any other class, create main method. Yeah, so here I will create a main method. So I will give some task here. If first I'll create two variables, int a equals 10 and int b equals 20. If a is greater than b, if a is greater than, sorry, if a is lesser than b, I will take. If a is lesser than b, create your own exception. So already we have created the class. Here with the help of throw keyword, we have to throw the exception. With the help of throw keyword, we have to create or generate a user defined exception. So here now I will write throw new random, no argument, and some string value. So throw we have to use, and after that create an object for the class which you have created. After hitting the throw keyword, create a object for the class which you have created, and it is showing one error. You can observe here. So now can you tell me whether it is a checked exception or unchecked exception? They are telling that compiler is telling that unhandled exception type random. So now whether it is a checked exception or unchecked exception, now compiler is forcing to handle means it is a checked exception. Compiler is showing a warning message. We have to handle this. So we can determine that it comes under the checked exception. So compiler will not allow for executing this. We have to handle or we have to throw. So now I will handle this exception, or else wait, instead of handling, we will throw the exception. So it is random. Yeah. Now there is no problem. Compiler is not doing anything. Compiler is not showing any error. Now whether the control will go inside the if block. Now whether the control will go inside the if block or not. I have given the value for the variable a as 10 and for the variable b as 20. A is less than b means now the condition is true here. 10 is less than 20. Now controller will go inside the block, if block, and it will throw a new or user defined exception. So observe the output now. Yeah. So exception in the thread main test dot random, and I have given the string value as ABC here. So successfully we have created our own exception. Whether in the exception hierarchy is there any exception called random? Whether random exception is there in the exception hierarchy? Check that. There is no exception called the random, but we have generated or we have created our own exception. So with the help of throw keyword, we can create or generate a user defined exception. So steps, what are the steps? Create a class, extend the exception, inside that class, create parameterized constructor, and that constructor should be of string type. Inside the parameterized constructor, pass the string value. So is it clear for everyone? Yeah. So that's all about the exceptions. And where we have to use the throw keyword, we have to use inside the method. Throw keyword should be used inside the method. Yeah, so that's all about the exceptions. Now we will move to the wrapper classes. So before going to the wrapper class, we have to understand why wrapper classes concept came, or what is the advantages of wrapper classes. Do you know what is the main use of the wrapper classes in the Java? Anyone in the class, do you know the answer for this? What is the main use of the wrapper classes? Why the concept of wrapper classes came in the core Java? Why the concept of wrapper classes? The reason is because we need, yeah, so we know that one thing, one use everyone knows, I think, in that it will convert primitive to non-primitive, and from non-primitive to primitive it will convert. But the reason is why we have to convert. What is the use of converting from primitive to non-primitive, and what is the use of converting from non-primitive to primitive type? We have to discuss now, because then only you can easily understand the wrapper classes. So the reason is we store, like, yeah, if we want to store element or data inside the collection, we need to store in the form of objects, that is non-primitive type. Non-primitive type. In the collections, we cannot store primitives. We have to store only in the form of objects, that is non-primitive type. That's why we need the wrapper classes to store the elements in the collection type. For example, What are all the primitives? Yeah, before going to the primitives, can you tell me the answer for this? Whether Java is 100% object oriented, whether Java is 100% object oriented, yes or no, true or false? Java is 100% of OOPS concept. It will follow all the everything 100% object oriented. The answer is no, because in Java there are 8 primitive data types. In the Java, we use 8 primitive data types. Whether primitives or objects? No. Whether is there any relationship between the 8 primitive data types to the object oriented, means any object concepts, OOPS concept? No, they don't have any relationship. Due to this, Java is not 100% object oriented, because in the Java we are using 8 primitive data types. So in an array, you can observe here, I'll create one array and you tell me the answers here. So in this, can I store, inside this array, can I store 10? Okay, wait. I'll create variables. It's enough. So inside this a of 0, can I store a1? Can I store a1? Yes or no? Yeah. So there is no problem for storing a1, because a1 is a primitive or non-primitive. That is, you have to focus here. That is the concept you have to focus here. Whether a1 is a primitive or non-primitive. A1 is a primitive or non-primitive. A1 is primitive, because what is the type of a1? It is integer, that is int. So int belongs to primitive type or non-primitive type? It belongs to primitive type. So inside an array, now we are storing a primitive value or non-primitive value. We are going to store primitive value. Here we are not storing non-primitive value. We are trying to store primitive value. Here can I create one more index, or can I store s here? Can I store s here? There it is showing already error. Type mismatch. Cannot convert from string to int. Now you tell me whether s is a primitive or non-primitive. Whether s is a primitive or non-primitive. So s is a non-primitive, because what is the type of s? String type. String comes under the non-primitive. All the classes are non-primitive data type. So did you got the point here? In an array, if I create one more string array, like s1 equals new string of 4, and here can I store s1 of 0 equals yes. 15th line, there is no problem in the 15th line. Compiler is not throwing any error also. So in an array we can store both primitives also non-primitives also. But in the collection, we have to store the elements in the form of non-primitives only. We cannot store primitive values there. We can store only non-primitive values inside the collection. Is it clear for everyone? That's why we need wrapper classes to convert from primitive to non-primitive. Then we can store the elements inside the array. Yeah, guys, give me a minute. So, did you understand the concept why wrapper classes came? Because in the collections we cannot store primitive values. If we want to store the primitive values, we have to convert from primitive to non-primitive. Then only we can store in the collections. That's why we have to use wrapper classes. So, for all the 8 primitive data types, we have corresponding wrapper classes. So what are all the 8 primitive data types? So primitive data types, and we have corresponding classes also. So the first one is what? Byte. So it is a primitive data type and the class name is byte. So here it is a lowercase b in the primitive data types because all the primitive data types are keywords. All the keywords are in lower case, and here the class, it is a uppercase b, and the second type non-primitive data, sorry, primitive data type is short. So the corresponding class is short only. Then like that, for all the 8 primitive data types, we have corresponding wrapper classes. Then long, then float, double, so these are all the primitive data types and these are all the corresponding wrapper classes. So we'll see one wrapper classes in the Oracle documentation. Not only one class, we'll see some 2 to 3 classes and we'll come to the conclusion about wrapper classes. If we want to convert from primitive to non-primitive, how to convert and what are all the suitable methods, we will learn in the Oracle documentation. Give me a minute, I'll show you the Oracle documentation of all these wrapper classes? So you can observe here whether it is visible or not for everyone. Oracle documentation of integer class. Yeah. So there you observe. So there you observe in which package it is present. Integer class, it is present in java.lang. All the 8 wrapper classes are present in the lang package only. They are present in java.lang package. You see, is there any suitable methods for converting from primitive into non-primitive int? So there is one method called value of. There is, so here you can observe there is a method overloading concept. Method names are same and the arguments are different. Yes or no? Here the method names are same, but the formal arguments what they have done is different. So now in the value of method, you can you read the description here? What is the method declaration? Observe there. So access modifier is public. Modifier they have used static keyword. Then what is the return type? Whether the return type is a primitive int or non-primitive int. Whether the return type is primitive int or non-primitive int. The return type is non-primitive int. The return type is non-primitive int because it is a class and the method name is value of and the argument it is accepting is primitive int. The return type is non-primitive int and the argument the value of method is accepting is primitive int. So we'll try to convert one now. First we have to declare one primitive int value, then call the value of method and you successfully convert from primitive to non-primitive. And remember, it is a static method. How to call the static method of another class with the help of class name. So integer dot value of and pass primitive int value. So same example. First, I will declare one primitive int a equals 10. So it is a primitive integer type. Then I will convert this into non-primitive. So how to convert? We have to call the method value of method. It is a static method. The class name is integer class. So class name dot static method. So integer dot value of, and what we have to pass here? We have to pass the primitive int. We have to pass primitive int. So here already we have declared a is of what type? Integer type. Whether that integer is primitive int or non-primitive int, it is a primitive int. So here I will pass a. And what is the return type? The return type is non-primitive int. So integer of b is, in the 10th line, value of method is returning the non-primitive integer value. Is it clear everyone? How to convert from primitive to non-primitive? Same as this, all the wrapper classes, 8 wrapper classes, they are having value of method. They are having value of method. So here we have successfully converted from primitive to non-primitive, that is integer. Then I will create another one double d equals 1.5. Then same thing, what is the class name, corresponding class name for primitive double? That is double only. Double dot value of double dot value of and pass primitive double, that is d I have passed here. The return type will be non-primitive double. So double, then I will take m is this. Same thing. For example, if you want to convert from char, also same thing. Char c equals a, then character dot value of, pass the c value and store that value in the character, that is non-primitive character type. So is it clear everyone about the wrapper classes, converting from primitive to non-primitive? Is there any doubt here? Value of method, static method. Yeah. So I hope there is no problem. Then we'll continue the another topics tomorrow, that is from non-primitive to primitive. In this class we have learned about the exception, how to handle the exception, types of exception, throws keyword, throw keyword, and wrapper classes. What is the use of wrapper classes, why we need wrapper classes, and how to convert from primitive to non-primitive, that is value of. It is a static method, we have to call with the help of class name. So that's all for today. We'll continue tomorrow. Same timings at 11 o'clock. Yeah. Thank you guys. You can leave now.